Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased that you are joining me for today's show all about Wyoming. Today, we're exploring location specifically, a guidance for yet another location, U.S. state, Wyoming. And as in all of my location specific episodes, I've included a bunch of hyperlinks that we're going to go through today when I screen share. Today, it'll be about Wyoming residential rental property. As in each of my location specific podcasts, this is all set up in the same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of Wyoming's residential rental property, meaning their tenancy laws? What are the nuances, some of the weird things that stand out that I see because I look at this quite often? The third thing is guidance about items left behind by a tenant in an abandoned property situation. And then four, where to get help in the local area in Wyoming. As I answer these questions, you'll see me screen share all kinds of documents specifically for Wyoming, and I'll check off items on my bingo card to see what each location has, what they don't have, what's different. And over the many years you've seen me doing these episodes and traveling, I have seen quite a few of these standard items that are on the bingo card. And at the very end of the episode, I'll go through the bingo card to help figure out what you need to research further, especially if you have more questions. Now, I must tell you that there are more guiding documents and more guiding things based on where you are and how we're doing this, more than what I'm going to give you here. So this is not everything. Even if I get this episode 100% right, 5 minutes after I'm done recording, laws can and will change. So you have got to do your own research, your own guidance for the local area of wherever your rentals are, whether they be in Wyoming or another place on the planet. So this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in your specific area, but today's episode is designed to get you started. But first, I have got to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments LLC. If you want to know more about real estate investing or how to join in on what Mike and I are doing, check out alohajv.com. Okay, on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share the hyperlinks for Wyoming. And on the other side, I'm going to bring up my bingo card for Wyoming. Okay, so the next bit here is we've got landlord tenant basics in Wyoming, Wyoming Residential Property Act. And so this one, you can see it's 18 pages. This one, it talks a little bit about how this all works with lease agreement. This one doesn't look like so legalese, like this is not the actual law. This is more of an overview, which is the user guide. I really like going through these more than the law. The law is way more detailed and usually lots of hyperlinks. And so I chose this one first as we go through. And so let's talk about what they've got. Lease agreement, statutory duties. There's no standardized lease form in Wyoming. So let's see, let me go here. Nothing standardized. Okay, leaving the landlord free to draft his or her own. You might consult an attorney when you're doing this, but maybe you don't need to. It's up to you. Defines owners and rentals responsibility. Landlord has duty to maintain safe, sanitary condition fit for human habitation, including operating electrical, heating, plumbing, hot and cold running water, unless otherwise agreed upon in writing, or units are seasonal, not intended to have such amenities. Okay, fair enough. Rental has duty to cooperate in maintaining the units. Specific duties will be defined. And it says any duty or obligation article could be assigned to a different party. Okay, if reviewing a lease, things to look for include my lease says what. Oh, this is cool. They give you an extra link on My Lease Says What by Elizabeth Gowdy, a Wyoming lawyer. Interesting. That's cool. At least you have a reference there. Any provision that's contrary, yeah, you can't contradict the law, right? So as a provision that assigns duty set over landlord, okay, modifies security deposit terms. So these are some of the items. Oh, looks like she's got about 10 items in here of what it is. It can't be ambiguity in the lease. You can't do anything not permitted by the security deposit. Let's see. When initially appears to a fixed term lease may contain some kind of provision that contradicts the expiration date. For instance, the lease may say the tenant must give a 30-day notice to vacate, but any ambiguity in the lease could be construed against the drafter, right? Of course. Any statement that a landlord may enter into with or without consent or reasonable notice. So that's called abuse of access. You want to make sure that you don't abuse that. If you're going to have a reasonable right to enter a unit, that you give proper notice. Acceleration of rent clause. This typically is the clause that says upon the tenant's default to pay provisions of the lease, the entire balance of the rent will become immediately due and payable. So that's called acceleration of rent. And so there is no acceleration of rent clause, and that's typical. There is usually not an acceleration of rent. And in Wyoming, there is not one. Attorney's fees provisions, and we've heard this from others saying that if you throw in attorney's fees, then it works both ways, and you want to be careful doing that, that you typically don't want to include that. And that's what this is saying as well. Any provision that states that a tenant agrees to abide by the rules or regulations made subsequent to the time of the lease agreement is signed. Basically, everybody has to agree, and then you can't change it without discussing further. Waiver of legal rights, statement that if evicted, the lease is still enforceable against the tenant and all rent posts. So that's the same as an acceleration clause. Nope. Any lead paint disclosures is required by current federal law. That's federal. Doesn't matter what state. Sorted fines, fees, i.e. pet fines, party fines, right to sublease fees, unreasonable late rental penalties. That's the first time we've seen late rent amounts. But they all have to be reasonable and a careful assessment of what, if anything, a landlord's agreeing to do. Okay, eviction. Let's talk about eviction basics, what every Wyoming lawyer should know about forcible entry and detainer, which is what eviction is called in Wyoming, forcible entry and detainer, FED. Most FED cases involve landlords or real estate owners trying to evict a tenant from real property or for failure of rent or failure to follow the lease. When the term tenant is used, it generally means a person residing in the real estate, whether by an oral or written lease, sales contract, or any other means. Okay, let's keep going. So this is the cases, Wyoming statutory lists the cases where eviction actions are appropriate. Tenants are holding over. So if there's a holdover, that means there is abrupt ending to the lease. It ends abruptly, meaning you have to give notice if you're going to non-renew or you're going to renew. You still have to give a notice because it does end at the end of the fixed amount, fixed timing. Rent is not paid for 3 days after it's due. That does not say it's a grace period, but so we'll say it's a grace period, even though it's not really a grace period, when the purchaser demands possession after legal sale. But you've got to be careful with that word possession. The buyer may have to show grounds that they're going to move in or something. Cases where defendant is a settler or occupier of lands or tenements without color of title. And then instances where the tenant violates a lease term, such as loud parties violations, law, premises, pets on the premises that are not allowed. Basically, a material term of the lease is broken. And yeah, so that's pretty standard. That's pretty standard. It's basically you haven't paid or you're not behaving, right? Notice to quit. The FED statute may be strictly complied with the first statutory requirement involves providing a notice to quit. Basically, this is the warning, hey, either smarten up or pay, or you're going to get this, what is it called? FED, federal forcible entry and detainer. So the notice to quit is written notice to leave. Notice must be given to the tenant at least 3 days to move out. Notice must be served. Although it is not clear the definition of service, this notice can be given to the tenant in person, left at his home office, or taped/posted on the front door. I usually do it at shoulder position. However, there should be a good faith attempt to personally serve the tenant prior to posting. Notice can be utilized in the court hearing for a couple of months, does not generally expire, and there may be arguments if a significant amount of time has passed. The sheriff does not have to serve the notice. However, it is probably a safe practice to use a neutral process server. So if you're concerned about serving notice for notice to quit or an FED, make sure that you're looking for either a neutral process server. You want to search that in your local area, or potentially a bailiff. That is usually the other word that is used. And summons. So this is a summons. Now, again, this is all talking about if the tenancy goes completely sideways. We're talking about eviction. We're talking about non-payment. We haven't even talked about the bits and pieces of what goes right in a tenancy yet. So let's get to that. So there's a summons, there's a trial. This is where it gets kind of nasty. Let's keep going on here. It talks about mobile homes. We're going to skip over that for now. Security deposits. Wyoming statute provides a procedure that the owner must follow if the damage deposit or utility deposit is not going to be returned. If the damage deposit is not refundable, it must be in the rental agreement and the agreement presented to the court. It is important to remember that when suing for damages, normal wear and tears accepted, damages for rent amounts for the remainder of the lease until the premises are re-rented is tricky. Yeah, okay, so it doesn't talk about how much and how fast the security deposit has to be returned. And a tenant must be current on rent payments in order to force the owner to repair a problem. If the tenant walks out on the lease without following the proper steps, the owner may sue for the rent remaining on the lease. So there is an acceleration clause if they're not current. So it's important that both the landlord and the tenant in Wyoming understands the rules of the game, right? Like this is all part of it. If the owner determines the cost of repairs are not reasonable compared to the amount paid for rent, nature of the rental property, or the rental agreement, she can refuse to fix the problem and terminate the lease. Yeah, if the owner chooses to terminate the lease under this provision, she must provide the tenant at least 10 days, but no more than 20 days notice from the date of notice to find substitute housing. The owner must also refund rent already paid for the days the tenant will not be living there, along with any deposit due. Okay, so they still haven't talked about what the deposit is. Oh, here we go. We're getting into the Article 12, the definition. So it defines owner, rental agreement, renter, termination, residential rental unit, and duty, renter's duty. I'm just looking through here because I want to make sure that what I'm looking for is I'm looking for items that are on the bingo card. So we're looking for things like tenancy application fee or pet fee, pet rent, security deposit. I haven't seen anything. Okay, so balance of the deposit and prepaid rent, itemized deductions from the deposit shall be delivered and mailed without interest to the renter within 30 days of terminating the rental agreement or within 15 days after the receipt of the new mailing address, whichever is later. Okay. So 30 days from termination or 15 days from new address, whichever is later. Okay. The renter shall, within 30 days of the termination of the rental agreement, notify the owner of the location where the payment or notice may be mailed, basically returning the security deposit. We still don't know how much that is, though. Okay, but that's okay. Let's keep going. Okay, now we get into more days. There's lots of days in here. After termination of the rental agreement, property or money held and separately identified as a utilities deposit shall be refunded to the owner or renter within 10 days. This is for the utility deposit. So there's a little bit of a different thing. There's a security deposit and then a utility deposit. Absent such showing within 45 days of termination, the owner shall within 15 days thereafter apply utilities deposit to any utility debt incurred after the renter. Any refund due to the renter shall be paid within 7 days. So you've got 45 and then 15 and then 7, or within 15 days after receipt of the new rental mailing address, whichever is later. So you've got a difference in between utility deposit and security deposit. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Plus security and then days matter. Okay. And that seems to be normal. Days matter on a lot of things. So you want to be sure, like it does matter if you're 1 day late or you're 1 day early. I mean, it depends. And you really need to know your days here. Okay, so it talks about, okay, so here it talks about abandoned property. Upon regaining lawful possession of the rental unit following termination of the rental agreement, the owner may immediately dispose of any trash or property reasonably believed to be hazardous, perishable, or valueless and abandoned. So basically, they can go in immediately, and that's kind of typical. So like if the fridge has been either turned off or abandoned, then that can all be disposed of. Any property remaining within the rental unit after the termination of the rental agreement shall be presumed to be both valueless and abandoned. Any valuable property may be removed from the unit, and there shall be thereafter be disposed as. Okay, so this is where it gets into dates. Typically, when we're talking about abandoned property, we're talking about value and time in storage that is allowing you to, as the landlord, to try to get a hold of the tenant saying, hey, I have your stuff. And then at some point, you have to do something else. And so we're looking for two things. We're looking for dollar amount, we're looking for days. And so the owner shall provide written notice to the renter in accordance with this paragraph describing the property claimed to be abandoned and stating that the property shall be disposed of after 7 days of the date of service of notice if the renter or the agent does not within 7 days take possession of the property or notify the owner in writing of the intent to take possession of the property. The notice provided by the owner is deemed, and so it talks about how you can actually do this. It looks like you can certified mail served under the renter, written notice delivered to the individual renter personally, or on the date notice, it's can be published in the newspaper. Okay. So you can do one of those three things. And then if the owner doesn't receive a response, then it can be deemed abandoned and the owner may retain or dispose of the property. And again, we're assuming this is valuable stuff. This is not garbage. It could be things like jewelry, cars is a totally different thing. If we're talking about abandonment of cars, I'm not even going to go there, but we're talking about valuable, non-perishable stuff that's not going to be thrown away, that you're actually trying to get back to the tenant, or that you're hoping that they don't respond and that you can keep or sell to recoup some of the loss. So, but in all of this, it also says the owner is entitled to payment of storage costs for the period of property remains in safekeeping, plus the cost of removal to the place of storage. Remember that in this entire thing, if a unit has been abandoned, the first thing you're trying to do as the landlord is get the unit back to a rentable state, right? You're trying to get it empty. And so you're doing throwing things out, you are evaluating the value of whatever is left abandoned, and you're actually just trying to get out saying, what do we need to do to repair this unit so I can get it re-rented? And then whatever is valuable will go into storage. And it could be something like it's held at your garage, maybe you had to rent a storage unit, whatever it might be, but that's what you're trying to do, right? When you're talking about an abandoned. Now let's talk for a second about why a tenant would abandon a unit. Usually it's either they're fleeing from something or they're in a situation where they can't return. So they're either fleeing, maybe it's an unsafe situation, maybe they're out of money, they're going bankrupt. But the other thing is that maybe they're incarcerated. Maybe they've been hurt and they're in the hospital. And if you can help, and they're not coming out, or they're not coming out for a very long time. And so there is a couple of different, or maybe maybe you're not sure, maybe they've passed away. Maybe they were gone somewhere and they passed away, or they are hurt somewhere else. As the landlord, you have no idea why they've abandoned this unit. But if there is a way that you can get a hold of someone in their family, a neighbor, a family member is ideal, then you can get the straight story. Even though you're trying to get a hold of them, if they're incarcerated, they're obviously not coming to get their items, but maybe a family member can. So, but you got to be careful with that too, right? You got to be. It's just very interesting how this all works when you're talking abandonment. Okay, um, let's keep going with the Wyoming Safe Homes Act, and here we go into domestic abuse, sexual violence, breach of lease, recovery of rent. Basically, if there is a domestic abuse, sexual violence items, anything that is unsafe, the tenant has the right to cancel the lease and to flee, which makes sense. So that makes sense, which is kind of typical. So that's your 18 pages in this. Now, we haven't talked about the nitty-gritty of tenancy application, tenancy law yet. We're going to get into that. So I'm going to go to the next hyperlink here. This one is for education purposes only. This is for University of Wyoming and legal information by topic. So this is called Landlord Tenant. It's 10 pages, and this is just informational. So Student Legal Services helped put this together. And so it looks like this is more for students, but keep going with some of this. So breaking your lease, you got to make sure you've got it in your lease of if you're going to break it, what happens. Subletting talks about subletting. You've got to make sure that you've got your landlord's permission before you're subletting. Deposits. Okay, a lease provision requiring deposit of money as security for performance of the condition in the lease, paying damages caused by tenant, valid, enforceable. Two primary types of deposits. We've already seen this already. Security deposits, utility deposits. I've never seen this before in a location, just so we're clear. I've never seen a utility deposit as well. There are also types of other deposits, such as pet deposits, which I have seen, right? Once the rental agreement is terminated, landlord may apply a deposit for unpaid rent. Oh, goodness. So yes, you can apply for unpaid rent, damages to the unit beyond reasonable wear and tear, cost to clean the unit, any other costs. Additionally, if you damage the rental property, you'll remain liable. Okay, let's talk about the security deposit. Wyoming statutes require certain things of both the landlord and the tenant for return or use of security deposits. Landlord's duty change depending on whether or not they're making deductions from the deposit. Tenants must notify the landlord of their new address within 30 days of terminating the rental agreement. This is done so that the landlord knows where to send the deposit. And if the tenant does not notify within 30 days, the landlord has 15 days to return the deposit from whatever the tenant notifies the landlord is of their new address. If the landlord is not going to make any deductions from the security deposit, then within 30 days of the lease or 15 days of receiving the tenant's new address, then you okay, so then so it's 30 days or 15 if there's no deductions. If the landlord is going to make deductions, then it's 60 days with an itemized list of all deductions. Itemize, yeah, cool. If the landlord sends you an itemized deductions, you look over and feel the charges are unfair and you can test them. It is possible to challenge them in court. If you plan on doing this, do not cash the refund check. Cashing the check implies that you accept the amount and can waive your rights to landlord dispute. Okay, utility deposit. If the deposit is a utilities deposit, it must be refunded within 10 days of the tenant showing that the utility charges have been paid. All right, that's kind of cool. Okay, and then this is 10 days of utilities paid to refund utilities. Interesting. I like this. Landlord may evict the tenant if they're 3 days paying late rent in violation of his duties or for any other reason specified in the lease agreement. So first, three-step process involving eviction, a notice to quit, and then a forcible entry, detainer summons, and then a writ of restitution. So we've gone through some of this already. Let's see what they say. Let's jump to this is in page 5 of the second hyperlink, personal property and eviction proceeding. A landlord does not automatically obtain a lien on the tenant's personal property. Therefore, even if a tenant is evicted for failing to pay rent, the landlord cannot keep the tenant's personal property as payment. However, the landlord may keep the tenant's personal property if there is a provision in the lease allowing the landlord to do so. Now, because Wyoming does not have a pre-made lease agreement, you as a Wyoming landlord might consider putting this in, saying, if you owe me monies, then you can keep the tenant's personal property in lieu of payment. Just saying, but you might want to have an attorney look at that if you're going to do that. Following the termination of the lease, the landlord may dispose of any trash or non-valuable property left behind, and then the landlord can also dispose of valuable property left behind if the landlord gives tenant notice that he or she intends to dispose of property and the tenant did not respond. Requesting repairs. Yes. Tenant can request repairs to the property if they have reasonable cause supported by evidence to believe the residential rental unit does not comply with the landlord's duty. And under Wyoming statutes, landlords are required to maintain the unit in a safe and sanitary condition fit for human habitation, ensure the property has operating electric, heating, and plumbing, provide the property to the tenant free from substantial disturbances, and maintain other appliances and facilities as specifically contracted in the lease. beware, these duties can be contracted away by the lease. So if the lease says that the landlord does not have to ensure that there is heat, then the property does not have to have heat, even though it is listed as a duty in the statute. Okay, you got to be careful here. Like there's sort of a morality part of this as well. Like you got to be a good human. If, you're in Wyoming and you need heat, okay, like some of this is sort of a how would you like to be treated kind of thing. Um, yeah. So this is talking about how the landlord has to be engaged and make this a clean and safe condition for a habitable unit. But the tenant also has to be current on all payments by the rental agreement and comply with the lawful agreements between the owner and the renter. Like everybody has to play along in order for everybody to remain engaged. And then it talks about how to request repairs and what happens if the landlord isn't doing it, right? And so basically the tenant can take matters into their own hand if they have given proper notice in writing. Yep. And so make sure you understand all of this with first notice, second notice. Tenants must be in compliance in order to exercise their rights in this section. Yeah, because it goes both ways. The sheriff can get involved on the repair time as well. What to do when a tenant is moving out. Using the landlord tenant checklist provided in legal documents in this section is helpful when moving in. So there is a condition inspection checklist. They call it a checklist. Now we haven't seen that, but if you're going to take deductions, you've got to have stuff in writing anyway, not just pictures. You need to have it written down. Inspecting the rental, tenant should make a list of everything that is damaged in the rental unit when they sign the lease, but before they move into the rental. And both the landlord and the tenant should sign and date the list, and each should keep a copy. So, and we do this. This is really important that you do this, and you should do it together. Some places don't require this, but this is just best practices, and Wyoming is following, which is good. If the landlord refuses to sign, make the list in the presence of a disinterested witness and then send a copy of the list to the landlord by certified mail. Goodness, if you're starting off a tenancy like that, that's going to be interesting with your business. Wow. Take pictures, ask questions. Roommate agreements. I have seen multiple roommate agreements that are really good, but you want to make sure you are clear if you are renting two roommates as a landlord that you only receive one rent payment, you're doing one deposit payment, and you're not playing the whole, well, I paid mine, and so they get to be evicted. You rent the unit, and then they figure it out. That's how I do it as far as roommates. Moving out notice. Okay, Wyoming equal justice. I'm going to click on this because I think we may be doing this one. Oh, it says it's unreachable. Okay, well, we're going to go to the next one. So this one, oh, here it is, Equal Justice Wyoming. Now this one is renters' rights and duties. It's 2 pages. This is the third hyperlink here. And I'm hoping that we're going to find some more of the nitty gritty of tenancy application, like, late fees and rent increases and things like that, because we haven't found that yet. We're just basically doing, what happens if. So this one talks about renters' rights, safe, clean unit, working electricity, plumbing, heat. When a renter does not have these rights, what to do, renters' duties, including pay rent on time, keep the unit safe, clean, take out the garbage, get landlord's written permission before having more tenants move in, follow the terms of the lease. You're not allowed to destroy anything. You can't interfere with neighbors' enjoyment of their own unit. You cannot refuse the landlord to allow to come in to make repairs, inspect the unit, or show potential buyers or renters, especially with reasonable notice, right? Okay, so this one just talks about relief sought by renters, first, second notice, and then court action, and then termination of the lease. And this is talking about if there is a problem with the condition. Yeah. Okay, so this isn't really saying a whole lot. Let's go to the next hyperlink. So this one, landlord tenant, again, Equal Justice Wyoming. This is a 6-pager. So this one's talking more about the leases of exactly what it should say in the lease. Length of time, all of these. We've actually talked about this. Expiration of the lease term becomes a holdover tenant. A tenant at sufferance is in naked possession of the property. That's a funny term, naked possession. Okay, rentals property owner duty, rental duty cannot do. We've talked about this already, but it doesn't seem termination of the lease agreement, forcible entry and detainer, eviction, and then the steps, trial. Okay, and then it talks about the days. So we still haven't gotten into, okay, so this is about abandoned property. We still haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty of security deposits and such. Hmm. So then it talks about, okay, so this one in specific, instructions for notice of abandoned property in Wyoming. This use this form if a renter moved away from a house, an apartment, and the land associated with the unit you own and left their belongings behind. And you have to be careful. They define real property and personal property. The real property is the house, apartment, and land you own as the owner, and the items the renter left behind is personal property. And then the personal property that was left behind is deemed abandoned. And so it actually walks you through how to create this form, how to write the form. Where is the form? Oh, FED form 17, instructions for notice. Okay. So this is talking about where it's going to go, how to serve it. So this is what to do with this. And then here is who can help you with these forms. Now keep in mind, this is typical county or court clerks, typically in any location, wherever you're listening to this podcast from, court clerks cannot help you fill out forms. They typically can't give you any guidance at all. They are only simply allowed to receive. That's it. So if you need help, there's actually 4 different ones here. This is actually really great. Legal Aid of Wyoming Hotline, opportunity to talk with a lawyer, 877-432-9955. This is for service with people who have limited income, limited assets. So this may not be available for landlords. Wyoming Free Legal Answers, this is a website, and this may also help limited income, limited assets. Volunteer lawyers on the website cannot assist with business matters, which is also with landlords. So this is pretty much tenant supporting. However, volunteer reference attorney program, this program lets you have a short informational meeting with a lawyer. This service is also for tenants who have limited income, limited assets. They also can assist with business matters. This is normal. So you can also go through, if you do not qualify for free services above, here's the trick. Call the Bar Association. So Wyoming State Bar, 307-632-9061, referral to Wyoming lawyers. And those lawyers charge for their services. But typically, if you're asking for a 30-minute consult, which you may not even need 30 minutes, they will help you. And yeah, you might pay $100 or a couple $100, even $300 or $400. That might be enough guidance to keep you going. You're not actually hiring them per se, but if you're asking for a consult, they may be able to help you with just a little bit of guidance here. So the next hyperlink here, this is wyomingaccountability.org. Now this may be more of renting in Wyoming. This is more tenant focused. However, you've got landlord tenant reform project. So there is ways that you can reach out for people. You can contact them here and say, this is what I've got an issue, whichever. But this is yet another way that you can help. This is tenant rights advocacy, but there is, if you're a landlord trying to get some help, reach out to them because there is quite a bit that you can talk to them, right? Just talk to them. So there's quite a bit in here. Tenant Rights 101, Judicial Decision Review, Press Kit, How to Protect Yourself. Now, again, this is tenant centric, but that's okay. And then you've got Legal Aid, legalaidofwyoming.org. Now, this is very likely more tenant centric as well. However, sometimes they have resources for landlords, including mediation. And there may even be some free items for landlords as well. So I've left all of this in here. Now, I am actually really shocked because we have gotten almost no information from these documents, which we've actually talked about, and some of this was passed by the legislature. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to search for this because I thought we had all of the documents and it doesn't look like we do. This is a critical review. Okay, what is this one? Critical review. So now this is from 2000. Wyoming's Rental Property Act, a critical review. This may not be the most current. Land and Water. No, you know what? I saw this one and I did not include it because it was from 25 years ago. I mean, things have changed, right? And applicability, this is from 2023. Just looking at this one is just a couple one-liners. Just for the record, I love that the state of Wyoming has the cowboy on a bucking bronco. I think that's so cool. Anyway, okay, residential property, that one's that one. Wyoming tenant laws. I try not to go to federal, like countrywide ones and then just go in. But let's just see what this one says. Rent due date. There's no statute in Wyoming state when rent should due. Application fees. Rental application fees not regulated in Wyoming. No statewide rent control. Late fees. No statutory limit on late fees. So there's some of these questions that we're asking about. It doesn't actually. Landlord tenant basics. I think we've already gotten this one. Yeah, this is the one that we looked at. I'm just looking for more information for this one. This looks like this is a law. Required disclosures. Okay, so this one is more lawyer based. Residential rental property. This is for, yeah, we looked at this one already too. Like we're getting to the point where there isn't a whole lot of guidance regarding tenancy law. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to go through the bingo card here because there's not a whole lot. I'm actually kind of shocked that there isn't a whole lot of guidance on the Wyoming stuff. So tenant application fee, there is no requirement of tenant application fees. So you can charge as a landlord, you can charge whatever you want. It's got to be, I would say it's got to be reasonable and it looks like it can be non-refundable if they want to apply, charge them $50 or whatever. Grace period for late rent without penalty, 3 days, and then you can serve them notice to quit and then move forward with your forcible entry detainer. Late fee amount, there is no amount for a late fee if they're not paying rent on time. It's not percentage or a flat amount or a maximum amount. It's whatever it is. Security deposit. In fact, there is security and a utility deposit. It does not say anything about the amount. It doesn't say what where it should be held, right? Because this is the tenant's money that the landlord then holds. It doesn't say anything about amounts or when it should be held. There's no standardized information about a lease. It says that you can make your own. No emergency contact required in the event of a tenant abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment. We've talked about this already when we're talking about abandonment. Pets and animals, pet deposit, pet rent, no guidance on that at all. Delivery of signed lease required. Nope, nothing mentioned. Condition inspection at move-in. It was noted that there was a good idea, but there was no standard lease, standard condition inspection or checklists at move-in. Again, if you've listened to this podcast, make sure that you are looking at other locations because there's a ton of standardized condition inspections. In fact, if in Hawaii, there isn't a standard one. I use the one from British Columbia and I just white out British Columbia and I use it because it's written and then I also take pictures. So there is in there as well. But for Wyoming, there is not a checklist that we found, nor are there standard warning letters or wording. There is a notice to quit, but we didn't see a template for that. No required maintenance inspections are noted, does not talk about rent control, how often the rent can be increased, proper notice of rent increase, the amount of rent increase, did not talk about the renter's insurance at all. It did not, it mentioned abuse of access that you have to give reasonable notice for accessing a unit and that the tenant has to comply. but it didn't actually define what proper notice was, how far in advance. Typically, it's 24 to 48 hours is typically what we do. Did not talk about landlord retaliation at all, timing or definition of landlord retaliation. It did speak to a lease abruptly ending at the end of a fixed lease term, that there is a holdover situation. And so you want to make sure you understand when you have a fixed lease, when you're coming up to that portion, you're either going to renew or non-renew, and you need to make sure you give proper notice. But again, it doesn't say what proper notice is. Condition inspection at move out, it's a good idea, especially if you're going to take deductions out of the security deposit. Return of deposit for the security deposit, because remember there are two deposits here. 30 days from termination or 15 days from when the tenant gives a new address, whichever is later, if you're not going to take deductions. If you are going to take deductions, then it's 60 days within an itemized list of deductions. The utility deposit is a 10 days refund when the tenant proves that all the utilities have been paid and then there's a zero balance. A landlord can use a deposit as last month's rent. And how long can you give notice of eviction due to non-payment of rent utilities? It looks like 3 days. Mischief, possession of unit, all of these are up in the air. And then abandoned items. We talked about abandoned items, but looks like anything that's of non-value or trash can be disposed of immediately. Anything of value has to be itemized. And then trying to give notice to the tenant and store it. And then you typically can take it over. That is the end of the abandoned items. There was some places that you can get some help if you are a Wyoming landlord, but you might have to pay for it, and that's okay because it's your business, right? That is what you do. So let's just wrap this up. As in each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of that area? What are the nuances of that area? Guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in that area, and then where you can go to get help with your local real estate in that area. And as I did, you saw me keep track on my bingo card of standard items I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations, which helped me as a summary for this location. And this is the same format for every location specific episode. So if you're interested in another geographic area, or you're thinking of buying rentals in another geographic area, you already know what I'm going to talk about. It's just a different location. Again, this episode is not all inclusive. You must do your own research further, specifically in your county, regional district, parish, whatever governing body that involves your rental location, especially if it's a municipality regarding licensing. You need to do your own research. And remember, if I got this episode 100% right at time of recording, 5 minutes later, laws can and will change. So make sure you do your own research. Call to action for you. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you're either new to real estate or you're new to real estate in Wyoming. Things you can do to help yourself is get into the documents, get into the actual nitty-gritty of the rules of the game of tenancy law in Wyoming. The next thing you can do is get into the conversations that other landlords in Wyoming are having, either on social media or in the physical spaces, right? There are meetups in your area. You just need to research and either jump on social media with other landlords or talk about physical meetings, whether that's a meetup or a Rotary meeting or Chamber of Commerce meeting, whatever it might be. Get in the room with other Wyoming landlords and ask your question, educate yourself. I hope you enjoyed today's show all about Wyoming. Don't forget to subscribe for more expert advice and real stories from across the rental property world. I'm recording this episode today from Maui, Hawaii. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 219, about the great state of Oregon. I'll see you there.